Elves. Elves have constantly been interwoven with the fantasy genre since the days of Tolkien. And that Tolkien-esque idea of the wood elves and high elves spending their near immortal lives basically carrying sway over whichever part of their fantasy world belonged to them has long been a trope that's been undertaken from a multitude of fantasy games. So welcome back to the next episode of From Dungeons to Starships, and our ongoing series looking at old Hammer miniatures that we think you should take a look at if you're looking to add a little bit of spice and a little bit of vintage to those rank and flank units that you're now toying with for your games of Warhammer the Old World. Please, if you've missed the first 2 episodes in this series of 5 and want to go back and check out what we've got at positions 5 and positions 4, then please go back and have a look at our previous videos and see if you agree with the choices we made at those 2 positions. Now again, I've said since the outset that these choices have not been solely mine. That I've gathered a group of friends together and we've discussed about what our top 5 would be. And we've had disagreements and heated exchanges over what should and should not be included. But in the videos as well, I've also given you, the community, the chance to champion the figures that you think should be on this top 5. And as such, this position number 3 is a miniature that you selected. Or let's put it this way, a miniature range that which you have selected. So for those again who would have not been with us in the first 2 parts of this series, what we're trying to do is again take a look back, further back beyond the plastic miniatures that a lot of people are disappointed with that have come along with the release of the new Warhammer Old World. Having a look at those older style plastics that were around for 6th, 7th, 8th edition, that we think that pretty much that we need to go back further, and maybe the more character is in the original metal sculpts that were produced late 80s, early 90s. And again, we're looking at miniatures that can add some character to your armies, some character to your units, and can often mean just elevating those rank and flank units on your table. So we've had 4 criteria in going back and selecting these miniatures, and 4 criteria that these miniatures had to meet in order for them to appear on the list. And for all those of you who've suggested this range of models, thank you very much that you followed this setup of these 4 criteria and explained your choices in this way. It's made my job of putting this video together far easier than what it could have been. So the 4 criteria come in line of number 1. So it must be a miniature that can be used within either one of the core armies from the Forces of Fantasy or the Ravening Hordes books, or can be used from one of those Armies of Legacy PDFs that GW have produced to support armies that they're not really supporting at this stage of the game. We all know that those armies from those legacy PDFs will be appearing in competitions and events. Maybe not those ones run by GW, but in time I'm sure that will change, that the whole community will adopt these armies of legacy again. But we're not talking about one of those at this stage. We're talking about one of the core choices. Now, elves have always been and will always be an integral part of any fantasy game. Again, running from that Tolkien-esque idea of wood elves and high elves being the mainstay, that have often been written into countless other fantasy genre games somewhere along the line. So an elf army, therefore, has always been one of those core choices in any game of fantasy battle. But it wasn't until the point when this range of miniatures came to the fore that the army changed into what's something that we'd more recognise on the table today. It's December 1987 and issue number 96 of the White Dwarf magazine, where a range of miniatures was debuted from the sculpting table of again Jez Goodwin and an article written by Graham Davis. So we were introduced to the not so prim and proper elves, because here came the punk rock of the War Dancers. Now we know that it, in terms of the design studio as what it was at GW at this time, was made up from very artistic characters. And at this time, so the inclusion of that rock vibe was always going to be present at some point. But with the War Dancers, and a number of them sporting quality mohawks, they really went for it with this range. Now it's fun to think as well where the miniatures were influenced from, and then what they went on to influence themselves. Here's my idea. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. But let's see if this carries sway. Miniatures gaming and the comic book genre have always gone a little bit hand in hand. And in 1978, a soon-to-be long-running comic series called ElfQuest was produced through Warp Graphics. Wendy and Richard Peeney gave us a slightly more brutal take on the elf race, with their main story surrounded a group of elven wolf riders. Now, the characters were depicted in a much lower level of armour and a much more diverse palette of colours than the layers of greens and silvers that we were used to from the Wood Elves and the High Elves of that Tolkien-esque fantasy. So as such, they started pushing the envelope a little bit for what could be seen as an elf warrior. The range itself would then go on to add changes to other games from GW. Only 6 months after the release of the War Dancers, 40k got its turn, and Eldar armies would receive the Harlequins, which again had become a massive mainstay within the 40k armies being available to play on the table. But not only this, in games of Blood Bowl, the actual name, the War Dancer, has been the only range of figures where that has become an actual position in the game, and it's seen as one of the better models you could field for the elf teams. So it's not to say that maybe that the release of the War Dancers has been a critical release in the complete elven aesthetic that runs throughout Games Workshop. Now, what did that aesthetic also go back and influence? Well, again, this is not, don't know whether this is true or not, but it's just a pet theory of mine. Maybe it fed back into the comic genre, because I like to think that you can't argue too much that The Crow has a lot of that graceful, killer, macabre dance that the War Dancers was based with. So it's nice to think that GW not only took its influence from another genre, but also gave back to a genre in the future. So War Dancers have themselves been involved in army lists since the 2nd edition of Warhammer Fantasy Battle, but truly took the form we know now in 3rd edition. And as such, this edition of models are still freely available, and with little searching, we're able to find said miniatures for as little as £5 a piece. So again, when we compare it to our Questing Knight Paladin at the £23 benchmark that we have for it for a single model available for the old world, they more than smash through that set of criteria. Elves themselves, again, because they are a long-running mainstay in any fantasy genre, have also made the move to Age of Sigmar, changing their name and taking on a different aesthetic, but it's still, we have more modern range with which to compare these 1987 models to. In fact, War Dancers themselves received a refresh around 6th, 7th edition from a new set of War Dancers that took on from this original 1987 set. Now, we did the same when we looked at the Skaven in the last video, comparing the old hammer sculpt to a newer plastic version. And then we saw that with the Skaven, as with the elves and the War Dancers here, we can see that the old hammer models are a lot chunkier, a lot less spindly in places than what we get from the newer plastic models that we have available to us today. And as such, I'd like to think that this range of models would more than take a day's travel and a day's play for which they would be having to endure from going to events. But the detail that goes into the newer models is offset against the character that each one of this range from 1987 have in bucket loads. So that's the paint. Well, this is the point where I can shout out the varied and truly inspiring work from all those old school models that are out there. And rather than me talk about it, let's just go and have a look at our community War Dancer gallery. So what do you reckon? Is your choice right or wrong from the community? Would you have made another choice? If so, I would love to hear your ideas below for this and what models you maybe would like to champion going forwards. I can actually see myself doing a follow-up to this series of 5 where I look back over all your suggestions and make sure that we have a look at the complete range availability of old hammer models that you have championed for us. But there's still time. You still have the availability to influence the top 2 spots, but it's going to take something very special to knock those 2 off their perch. So thanks for taking the time to watch. Please again do us the favour of the like and subscribe. After all, it costs you nothing. You can always change your mind at a later date. But till next time, I hope that the dice treat you well in your games from dungeons to starships.